Wade and Wade reacts.
We got another Sloth Cakes request. He's covering Zeons heat weapons.
Welcome everyone, Sloth Cakes here to some more Gundam shenanigans. Now today let's venture forth and discuss one of the most iconic weapon types of Zeon, but also in Gundam, and that is heat weapons. Now I do want to keep it in a broad sense, since each one of these beautiful tools deserves their own spotlight. And also going too in-depth into example like Heat Hawk would also make me go into the development of the Zaku, which is its own can of worms. So let's just test the waters, dip our feet in, and hold that idea for the future. Anywho, with that out the way, heat weapons are Zeon's go-to melee option for most of the 1 year war, and is scattered about after. They come in many shapes and sizes, with some odd unique ones, and even appear in other universes. But eventually, beam melee does phase them out, but personally, heat weapons just have some sort of aesthetic to them that's unrivaled. So let's get into it. Now, what is a heat weapon? For a broad definition, they are tools that can be carried by the mobile suit. When held, they draw power from the mobile suit's thermonuclear reactor. This heats up the designated spot of the tool red hot in a matter of seconds. And due to the combination of striking things and turning it on and off, deterioration will kick in, and heat weapons do need to be maintained and repaired and replaced after so many uses. Now this leads to the question of, what's it made out of? We don't know exactly what it is, maybe some sort of metallic mixture. My guess is maybe tungsten or something similar to that, or just a mixture of it. Due to its initial hardness being used in many things like drill bits to cut through tougher materials. It's also used in things like rocket engine funnels, light bulb filaments, and heating elements.
He really did his research.
Due to its high melting point of 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Or it could just be made out of the same thing the Zaku's made out of, or just something else that's just blessed by Zeon space magic. Next is why. Why were these made? Well, to cover Jim's face in, of course, right? Not so much. The Heat Hawk was developed alongside the Zaku too, specifically the MS-06C. It was made to be a tool for various purposes like cutting hulls, fortifications, forests. Think of an oversized machete that can heat up. And like one, they make good melee weapons. However, due to the Federation not having mobile suits at the time, the only time you would use it for close quarters would be if someone stole a Zaku. So many Zakus at the time didn't carry one, and if your bud has one, well, he's on Heat Hawk duty. But soon, people at Zeon worried. They had the foresight of what if. They were concerned that the Zaku didn't have a proper melee option, and while not a problem now, it's clear that mobile suits are successful. Meaning if, and more like when, the Federation gets mobile suits, they're going to have to engage in close quarters combat. And if the Federation has this in mind, and Zeon does not adjust, things are going to get ugly. So the Heat Hawk was made, then refined to things like the Type 3, which is what the 06C uses, and the Type 5, which is what the modern 06F uses. And like I said, I wanted to keep this general. There's more detail to this, but I wanted to give you a rough idea how the Heat Hawk was made, so we're going to fast forward a little bit. So now the Federation's got mobile suits and melee weapons of their own, and it's a scary one, the beam saber. In short, a suspended beam shot with a handle, and that's terrifying. And I cannot imagine how horrified some poor Zaku's soul was when they first saw someone pull this on them. And doubly so the insanity of someone thinking a heated up Heat Hawk would be able to stop it. But it did, somehow. Maybe it's due to the high heat. Or maybe it's due that the Heat Hawk produces like an electromagnetic field that interacts with the eye field of the beam saber. Maybe it has something to do with a combination of what I just said. Or maybe it's due to the rule of cool. Whatever it is, a heated weapon can clash, stop, parry, and interact with a beam saber with great effect, giving them another use that a majority of people know them for: mobile suit combat. This sprung Zeon to develop more Heat Hawks due to demand, and future mobile suits would have melee weapons in mind. This would lead to various heat weapons being made, like the large Heat Hawk, the even larger Heat Hawk, and the comically large Heat Hawk. But not only that, we have heat daggers, heat swords, heat sabers, and even this weird tentacle whip thing known as the heat rod. But they all had to face the beam saber, which led them to show some key problems. First, while cheap to produce, they were more prone to breaking, and beam sabers can still break, but everything that you need to repair is in the handle part, because the weapon part is a beam. Heat Hawks because of, first of all, bashing it into something repeatedly and heating on and off is gonna wear it down, and that blade needs to be replaced.
True.
Now, with the Heat Hawk, no biggie, you can get that replaced anywhere. It's a common weapon. But if you've got something more unorthodox, or if a new weapon came out and it's non-circulation, it's gonna be much harder to repair it. So you either have to ditch it and get a Heat Hawk, or you're just not gonna have a melee weapon available. Plus, they weigh more and take up more space. This can lead to transportation problems, and in times, weight is a priority. But also, you can just fit much more beam sabers in the area than
And you'll
heat
be a lot
weapons
slower
due
in
to
battle
it
too with a
just
heavy
being a handle.
axe.
And also, if you carry too much shit, it's gonna be problematic. You only have so much space. There's also problems tied to specific weapons, like the heat rod being, well, the heat rod. But those are for another time. And even though Zeon knew these problems, they would try to fix them with iterations. However, eventually Zeon would transition over to being melee. But before that, let me highlight some well-known heat weapons just to show you what they're about. So let's start with the most well-known, the Heat Hawk. And I've already talked about this thing plenty of times already, so I'm just going to keep this short. It's a one-handed axe in the shape of a tomahawk. It was originally made as a tool, but it did have mobile suit combat in mind, and later iterations and versions would embrace that aspect. An example is the Zaku Kai, with a Heat Hawk that's quite similar, but it has a collapsible handle. This allows it to be stored easier and take up less space. We also have the large Heat Hawk, which is in the name. It's just a larger Heat Hawk. And they do come in variety. We have just a larger looking one. We have something like the Act Zaku's large Heat Hawk, which looks much more visually better. And we have a different version of the large Heat Hawk,
That's a nice
which
one
is
too.
most well known by Dazzle
Zaku is
Zaku
crazy.
or Dom, which looks the same, however it has a blade on the top. We also have a Heat Hawk with a longer handle, but it's also collapsible, making it easier to carry. And in Gundam The Origin, we see something similar with the giant Heat Hawk. A Heat Hawk so big, it's a threat to warships. And there's also the Heat Tomahawk, which is a double-sided Heat Hawk. However, axes aren't the only thing Zeon made. There's the Heat Saber, also known as the Heat Sword. A one-handed sword that can also be held too. It's good in size, and when you look at it proportion-wise, it's pretty goddamn big. Also, the Heat Saber from the start was originally made to be for mobile suit combat. And if you look at the thing as a whole, the heated part is significantly bigger than the Heat Hawks being the entire sword. And for a fun fact, the OG Goof, the MS-07B, the one that Rambara used, had a unique heat sword. When not activated, it just looked like a handle with a dinky spike. That's because it has a memory metal, and when heated, this metal forms and takes shape of the blade, which on a simple look and visually in the anime can easily be mistaken as a beam sword.
Seems like it.
And while this weapon scores a ton of points in the ruler cool factor, it was really convoluted for just a heat sword. So they later ditched this idea and just made the heat sword a regular heat weapon. Or this could have been an animation error, but let's not think about that.
Yeah,
But on the topic of convoluted, questionable ideas that are cool, the Goof also has the Heat Rod. This is located under the right wrist of the Goof, and it's a thick metallic rod tentacle thing that the Goof can use to grapple or whip things. And as the name implies, it can heat up and gain cutting properties, being able to cut through the Gundam's foot. Not only that, it can actually electrocute things upon contact. Now, this weapon, while extremely cool, is extremely convoluted, expensive, and difficult to use, so it would later get replaced with the Heat
I can
Wire.
imagine that.
But not until they tried again with the Egu guy, where they put 4 heat rods on it. But that's for another time. Now, let's move on to a more mobile suit and go to the Dom with its oddly named Heat Saber. Shown to be a simple handle with a long, thin rod to it, it looks very similar to that of a beam saber, but just its heat equivalent. Now, moving on to some key features, first is its length. This thing is long. It's shown to be as long or even longer
that looks
than
like
that
they
of a
were
beam
getting closer
saber,
to beam
and
saber
it's more
technology.
than half the length of the Dom itself. Next thing is an odd one, and I can only find this also on the Heat Rod, and that it has no sharp edges to it. And also, it's rather thin, which makes me believe that this thing has to be repaired and replaced much more frequently compared to others. Now, in my personal opinion, I believe that the Dom's heat saber needs the Dom to succeed. This weapon was made to complement the Dom's mobility and swiftness, because if you look at other mobile suits, they've used other heat weapons. Like the Zaku has used the Heat Hawk, but it also used the Heat Saber. And the Dom has been shown to be able to use the Heat Hawk. However, besides Dom types, I don't think there's other Zeon mobile suits that have been shown to use the Dom's Heat Saber. And for
I think the high mobility
comparison,
Zaku,
the Dom and the Heat
in one of the
Saber
clips
looks
we
very
reacted to,
similar to
had
that
a
of a kendo martial
what do you call it,
artist and
saber,
full equipment holding
I'm not
that of a
mistaken.
bamboo sword. Now, there's plenty more information when it comes to types of heat weapons, variants of heat weapons, and the mobile suits that use them. However, I just want to keep it at a basic level and give you guys some variety to pick on, get the good old noggin jargon. And like I said in the beginning, even after the war, we do see some heat weapons here and there, but later on, Zeon would also adopt being melee, with things like the Gyan, the Gelgu, and the Camper being some of the first to utilize it. But due to this happening at the end of the 1 Year War, we don't get too much. But in later conflicts, because what is Gundam without war, we would have things like Neo Zeon, and also Neo Zeon would develop Zeon-inspired mobile suits but would have beam melee. But on the plus side, we do get more unique looking beam melee weapons, like the Gyaradoga's beam sword axe. And also if we look at the Sazabi, he has a beam tomahawk looking a lot like a heat tomahawk. And we can't skip over the heat weapons that make an appearance in
I'm not
other
even sure how
universes,
that would be possible.
like Gundam Wing,
None
we
of
have
it
the
is,
heat
but
shot
that's a
on
little bit
Sandrock.
more
Massive
outlandish
curved
than the
blades
beam
that
saber.
work fine as blades by themselves, but when needed they can heat up. And in the same series we have the Gundam Epion with its heat rod. In short, it's extremely similar to its UC counterpart. However, it does have a few differences that just makes it so goddamn cool. First, just looking at the thing, it's so much more intimidating. Instead of being just a metal tentacle, it's this weird segmented whip thing, with each segment having the shield hook blade. And without adding the
That's a
heat
crazy
factor
design
by
right there.
itself, it just has a menacing look to it. The thing looks scary. But I'll keep my gushing about the Epion for
I
another
wouldn't want to
video,
see it up
because
close.
we cannot forget, because it's really easy to forget, about Gundam H, because it has one of my favorite heat weapons. It's used by the Geno Ace, the gym of that universe, which it does look and act like a gym, and even has a beam spray gun. And you would think maybe it has a heat version of the beam saber, being something like the Dom's. And I would give you credit, that would make sense, but it doesn't. And not to get into lore reasons, it has the heat stick, which is basically just a spike. I like to call this thing the heat shank. It is the most goofiest looking, dumbest thing ever.
That's what I'm saying.
It is just a dinky little spike that can heat up. Besides being the most complicated prison shank ever, there's another unique heat weapon of age, and it's used by the Desperado.
He purposely plugged
And
that
like
clip in.
Zaku's Heat Hawk, it was originally supposed to be a tool, but works fine as a weapon, and that is the Heat Shovel. And it's a shovel, so you can assume what it does. It's a damn shovel. But even
That
though
would help
it's
on a snow
just
day,
a
wouldn't it?
shovel that can heat up on the end, I would prefer this any day of the week instead of the heat shank, because
Me too.
while the heat shank can be helpful in a few scenarios, 9 times out of 10 I'd rather go with the shovel, because with this thing it looks much more effective as a melee weapon, and also I can love as Shovel Knight or Krieger. But it doesn't end there, because the Desperado also has the heat pickaxe, which, like the shovel, is a tool but would make a very effective
He must be a construction
weapon.
bot then,
Plus,
huh?
this thing looks really cool. I really love the design to it. And I gotta mention it because it's hilarious. The Geno Ace was developed from Desperado, but the Desperado, being a mobile worker while the Geno Ace is a mobile suit, has better melee weapons, in my opinion.
That's
The
crazy.
heat shank is like
But it
small, so you can
does.
store it, but at that point, just give me the damn shovel. But
Yeah, with the
now
heat
let's
shank,
wrap
you gotta
this
get
up,
too close to
because
your
we've
opponent to
opened up
even
many
use it.
questions that I eventually will tackle, like going into specifics on some weapons. We only scratched the surface of heat weapons, and there's still plenty of information on even the ones I mentioned in this video. Plus, there's the non-heat or beam weapons, like the amphibious mobile suits Iron Nails, ones that I've talked about plenty on this channel. But there's still plenty more.
So much
And we cannot leave
to
out
unpack
the
and
other
dive into.
universes with their takes on melee weapons, and some having some unique options, like Double O having its GN particles. I also want to cover and ask some questions, like what if heat weapons kept on being made? What if the Federation never made the beam saber and made heat instead? These are all interesting topics which I do want to tackle.
I think in the long run they would lose lots more money
But I do want to end
due
it
to
with
having to
this
repair
question,
those weapons
and
all
it's
the
a
time.
simple one, and that is why heat? Well, they could do energy weapons instead, but the Federation already has Minovsky particles, so maybe they could do like plasma, but that might be too similar looking and could confuse the audience. Maybe they can get a regular weapon and coat it in something, like some anti-beam material or Minovsky particles.
That would make sense.
And for whatever reason, it can clash with a beam saber. But maybe on a visual standpoint, that wouldn't be too interesting, and the audience might forget. Maybe they could do like a self-repairing metal, or maybe like a high-frequency weapon. All these are interesting
Good
options,
ideas.
and some of them do appear in Gundam, but it always comes back to why heat? Well, it's simple, and that is its simplicity. It allows for a large variety, giving a nice visual appeal to it, and while it's an advanced tool, it's a very easy concept to wrap your head around. It's a weapon that its blade part heats up red hot. Very simple to describe, but it also complements beam sabers. Side by side, these are two highly advanced pieces of technology. They are held by giant robots after all. But like with any real-world weapon, get any sword or axe, you can see the history behind it. You can see its advancements, its purpose, and how it's used. And when you look at the Zaku with the Heat Hawk and the Jim with the Beam Saber, you can see how the Jim is more advanced, having this energy sword. But with the Zaku and its Heat Hawk, you can still see it's a threat, and they both can harm each other. And maybe this is why. Maybe this is why there's heat weapons, because of how complex and how simple it looks. Because it's just an axe that heats up, but there's so much history behind that. It just looks so interesting by itself. But when you throw in the Jim's beam saber into it, it just opens so many doors and asks so many questions. And maybe that is why we have heat. Maybe that is why heat melee exists. Or maybe it could just be that it looks cool. And when something looks cool, you don't gotta explain shit. Anyways.
When I first started getting into Gundam clips, that's one thing I noticed. I noticed that the Zeon mobile suit operators had heated bladed weapons and the Federation had beam sabers. At that time I thought they were plasma swords, but somebody came into the comments and corrected me and gave me the right information. I thought that was a good distinction between both factions, but it is a realistic progression for Zeon to move more toward beam technology because it seems like that's a definite step up from heat weapons.
Yeah, it would have been cool if they would have kept developing the heat weapons, but like you said, it makes more sense for them to adopt the beam weapons too, because it'll probably cost more, like Burr was saying in the video. They had to repair the weapons with the beam, you just got to repair the, I guess it would probably be like a computer. They probably had certain like pieces, like I guess motherboards and all that kind of stuff, and then you have to put some type of energy source in there. Mm-hmm. And then I think on the last one, didn't he say that some of the beam weapons are powered by the actual Gundam suit?
I think so.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier to have that weapon.
Yeah, true. A lot less material, less metal that goes into the repairing of it. So definitely cheaper. That does it for our reaction to this subscriber request. Don't forget to leave your thoughts down in the comment section. Also like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you'll never miss a video from Wade and Wade Reacts.
And we're out there.
Peace.